All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to Reading, Writing, and Ralph. We are over halfway through October. I hope everyone enjoyed the Mystery in the Museum live stream in-person episode of Reading, Writing, and Ralph. If you did not get to see it, then you can check it out on our YouTube and our Facebook. It will be archived up there forever. Before we get started with tonight's episode, I want to first thank our sponsors, the Kathleen and Eddie Arthur Hearts of Love Fund. This is a community fund that was started by a born and raised Alexandrian in the community. They have grown so fast in 3 years. They have just hired their first payroll employee. So congrats to the Hearts of Love Fund for continuing to grow. All right, so tonight's episode, we continue with the baseball theme. We talked to Kevin Keating last time. We're talking to Marty Appel tonight. So he is the author of Casey Stengel, Baseball's Greatest Character. Now, I'm going to bring on Ralph so he can give us a little bit more of an in-depth intro before we bring on Marty. Hello, Ralph. How are you?
Hi, Grace. How are you doing tonight? Boy, that was quite an event on Saturday, wasn't it?
Oh my goodness, it was great. And I know we had promoted it beforehand, but it was even better than I could have anticipated.
Casey Stengel, Baseball's Greatest Character, is one of his books. Another of his books is Pinstripe Empire, which is one of my favorite all time. Of course, I'm a lifelong Yankee fan, and fabulous book. Marty's a prolific writer, and he's obviously loves the New York Yankees, so we've got two things in common off the bat. And so excited to have him on. Everybody will remember this season because of the Judge's historic run at baseball's American League, anyways. All-time home run record. He surpassed Roger Maris at 62. Didn't quite get to the Bonds record, but at least he's got the American League record, so it's unbelievable. So,
yeah, I mean, even if you're not a Yankees fan or a baseball fan in general, I think you can still be pretty impressed by Aaron Judge's efforts this season. So that was really exciting to watch. All right, so I am going to bring on Marty, and I'm going to let you two take it away to discuss his works.
Hi, Marty. Welcome.
Thank you. Great to be with you. I'm admiring all the baseball cards on your wall.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, the cards. I've got autographs. I've got several. I don't have Ruther Garrett, but I do have four others from the 2017.
Nice.
I grew up in the Bronx, and so I've been a Yankee fan since watching my first game in 1955 when the Dodger series, the one they lost, unfortunately.
Same for me, Ralph. That was my first baseball memory was the 55 World Series.
Yes. Great teams, great memories, and Casey was managing them. But as I always ask our authors to come on and have the tell a little bit about yourselves to our viewers. And many might not know you. Most we'll get sports fans are going to know who you are. So why don't you tell everybody about yourself?
Well, I'm a lifelong Yankee fan and later an employee and so forth. Mm-hmm. But it was all a mistake because I was born in Brooklyn. And my first memory was the 55 World Series, which Brooklyn won their only world championship. And I was 7 years old, and I felt terrible for the underdog, the Yankees. And I decided I was going to adopt them as my team. Mm-hmm. So there I was in Brooklyn with those great boys of summer teams, and I became a Yankee fan, not knowing any better that they won all the time. So it's been good to me because the Dodgers left everybody brokenhearted just 2 years later when they moved to Los Angeles. And I've had many more happy nights being a Yankee fan than I otherwise might have.
Yes, I remember that World Series and remember watching it. And after that series, my father told me he was going to go out and buy me a glove. And I enjoyed pitching, so I thought he would come back with a Whitey Ford glove. And now we're living in the Bronx, right? And of course, he comes back with a Johnny Padres. I guess it was okay.
Well, for your younger audience, Johnny Padres was the winning pitcher in Game 7 to give Brooklyn their only world championship.
Absolutely.
And to
Absolutely.
complete my story, 55 was when I became a fan. In 67, I got hired by the Yankees to answer Mickey Mantle's fan mail. It was a summer job away from college, and that began a career that's now over half a century old, doing PR for the Yankees, producing their telecasts on WPIX in New York, and writing a lot of books about the Yankees. So today I'm viewed by some as a team historian, and I'm always happy to be identified as that. So Pinstripe Empire, which you mentioned earlier, one of the books I'd written, is the full history of the Yankees. So I really needed to immerse myself in all things beginning in 1903. And then Casey Stengel came along in 2017, and it was called Baseball's Greatest Character, not my designation, but MLB Network had begun in the 2010s. And they used to do these superlative things: greatest World Series player, greatest relief pitcher, greatest shortstop. And they did Baseball's Greatest Character. And they named Casey Stengel ahead of Babe Ruth, Jackie Robinson, ahead of everybody, ahead of 19,000 other people. So that became our working title. And as I wrote the book, I could see why it was true. He sure was.
Yeah, Stengel, definitely an interesting character, and there are moments in that book, beginning, I think, early on, and there's a couple of things that you wrote about Casey that I just simply had to scratch my head about, and the one of them is, I guess. He hung out in his New York Yankees underwear way past his career as managing the Yankees. tell fans, our viewers, that story.
Well, he was mostly loyal to the Mets in his final years. Mets had hired him after the Yankees fired him. He was always true to the Mets, and he loved to talk about the future of baseball, and you got to be rooting for the Metsies. But in retirement in Glendale, California, where he lived in a beautiful home, he would wear Yankee underwear, which he had saved for 20 years, because he just found it more comfortable than his Mets underwear. Didn't make him baseball's greatest character, but it showed how deep my research was.
Yeah, absolutely. It certainly catches your attention right at the start. So, if memory serves me, Casey came on almost immediately after Joe McCarthy. And what was the reception in New York like for him? Because I remember he was a mediocre manager up to that point.
He was a really unsuccessful manager, only in the National League, always below 500, never in contention, famous for his umpire arguments and his general shenanigans and his Stengelese, which is his way of avoiding questions. He would double talk the answers, and everybody found that amusing. And when the mighty Yankees, with their tradition of winning World Series all the time, hired Casey Stengel, most people thought, my God, they've gone crazy. They hired a clown. And Casey had been successful in Oakland in the Pacific Coast League. And his wife, Edna, said, don't take the Yankee job. We're happy here. We're in California where we live. You've been a great success here. You've won PCL championships. What do you need this for? And Casey said, I'm just going to take it for 1 year. I got to prove that I can manage a good team to a successful season. So he did. He managed the Yankees to a world championship in 1949. And he stayed for 12 years, winning 10 American League pennants and 8 World Championships, and punching his ticket to the Hall of Fame. So he lied to Edna. He didn't stay 1 year, but he kept getting new contracts, and he was loving every minute of it as he managed the likes of Joe DiMaggio and Whitey Ford and Yogi Berra and Mickey Mantle and Phil Rizzuto and Billy Martin, and it just went on and on and on. He'd never tasted success like that before, and he loved it.
Was it just a matter that he had a better team then, or was his style and his approach to the game changing at all?
Well, he had a better team, and he also employed what came to be known as platoon baseball, where he would really juggle righties and lefties depending on who was pitching that day. But he had the good fortune of having all of these fine players to work with. So it wasn't like, well, I'll sit Gil McDougall today and I'll play Jerry Coleman. I mean, both of them were all-star players.
Yeah,
So it wasn't a tough choice. He had the horses.
Yeah, he sure did. He sure did. So let's talk about some of the things that make, or at least MLB sought to contribute to Casey as him being the greatest character of all time. Give us a few Casey moments and that made Casey Casey, I guess.
Well, let's go back to high school in Kansas City, Missouri. I was fortunate when I wrote this book that the internet was available to me. There'd been a really fine Casey book before me by my friend Bob Creamer, but he didn't have access to old newspaper files the way I did when I came along with it. So there was a website, newspapers.com, where you could go back and look in old newspapers in small towns where he had played or managed. So a treasure trove emerged from that of amazing, great stories in the minor leagues. In high school in Kansas City, he was a classmate of a fellow named William Powell, who became an A-list actor in the 30s and 40s. Some of your viewers might know the name. But Casey was famous in high school for sitting in the first row and heckling William Powell during his school plays. So this was the emergence of a character. And after high school, Casey got admitted to dental college in Kansas City. Now, he did that in the off season when he was already starting his career as a minor league player. He went 3 years to dental college when they finally called him into the office and said, "Dutch," which is his nickname back then, "I'm afraid we have to face up to reality. You're never going to be a dentist because they don't make equipment for left-handed dentists. And so we thank you for your 3 years here, but there's the door. Don't let it hit you on the way out." So I suggest in the book, how could this college take his tuition payments for 3 years, knowing there was no chance? The equipment simply wasn't made for left-handers. There were no left-handed dentists. And for 3 years, they had him matriculating there, learning the dentistry. But he kept it in his mind his whole life because, for instance, when Bobby Brown came to the Yankees, he was studying medicine and went on to become a heart specialist in Dallas. And Casey met him and said, "I'm a professional man myself." Talked to him as though doctor to doctor. Bobby Brown was way ahead as a cardiology student. So Casey, he developed friendships with some of the mega names in the game: John McGraw, DeRocher, of course, the Yankee geniuses of George Weiss and Topping and Webb. But he was a great politician also. He sort of knew how to work the game, how to succeed in business. So people ask me today, would Casey have succeeded today? And I would acknowledge that the game has changed a lot. But Casey was a good politician. He would have figured out how to keep staying employed even under today's conditions.
Yeah, today's world's completely different. For example, after the current season ended, so many people were lauding Judge for having played 55 consecutive games at the end of the season. And you must have had the same visceral reaction, I think, that I did. It's kind of like, well, he's only, 2,080 short of Gehrig.
Plus, he played a lot of them as a DH. Not a lot, maybe, but I'd say 7 or 8 as a DH. So,
which wasn't around then.
No, it wasn't even around for Roger Maris's time.
Yeah. So how do you? I mean, it's a tough thing to understand as a fan, right? There's better nutrition. They're bigger, stronger, faster. Yet they don't have the durability or the stamina when it comes to playing even 100 games in a row. Why is that? What's your thoughts on that?
It's probably those noodle heads in the front office who do all the analytic printouts and decide that players need rest after X number of days, and they will show you the graphs how they'll do better after a day off. But right, I mean, those of us who grew up when you were expected to go out there and play every day, or the manager wasn't playing his best lineup, are appalled by this. It's not the game we grew up with.
So let's now take that back to Casey. So, and something you said, he's a politician. So Casey started, maybe didn't start it, but it was attributed to him platooning. So would he have done better if somebody like Michael Fishman hands him a budget chart and says, here's your hours, or here's your pitch count, or here's your innings that this guy can play?
I'd like to think he'd have set it aside and relied on his own instincts, which were pretty good. But as I say, he was a good politician in the game, and if that's what it took, he would have said, thanks, I'll study these overnight. Come back the next day and prepared a lineup. But like I said, he had just so many great players to choose from. It was hard to fault him for whatever lineup he put out on the field every day.
Yeah, he had a talented bench. So, give us another story about Casey that, again, nobody may know, and it'll provide a good entertainment for us.
I loved when he first got to the New York Giants. He had played elsewhere, but when he got to the Giants, this was really big time. He was going to be playing for John McGraw. He was going to be in the big city. And he was a little apprehensive about the big city. So when you're the home team, it's not like there's a team hotel. You're sort of on your own as to where you're going to live. So he found a hotel in Times Square, which can be intimidating even back then as it is today. And to acclimate himself to his surroundings, he was, I think, on 46th Street. So he went out of the hotel and he walked to 45th and back to his hotel, rested a little bit. Then he went to 44th and back to his hotel and rested a little bit. And on and on and on this went till he got down into the 30s and he felt like, okay, I know my neighborhood now. So he needed a sense of the familiar, even after so many years and so much travel around the country to every imaginable minor league city. So when he first broke in, he played at Kankakee, Illinois. And their ballpark happened to be next to what was in those days called an insane asylum. And the inmates or patients would watch the games from the windows. And Casey's teammates, this is his first year in the minor leagues, Casey's teammates used to tell him, we're all going to go up a level next year, Case, but that's where you're going to be. Be watching from the windows the following year. So his first year minor league teammates already got the idea.
He's something else. I remember, watching him manage and having conversations with my father about Casey. And, my father was old school Italian, so, he'd look at Casey and like, sometimes he'd go like, I don't know. So anyway, but one of the biggest challenges I think Casey had while he was with the Yankees was the brawl. And I'm not talking about the baseball field brawl. I'm talking about the Copacabana brawl. Looking back at that now, how do you think he handled that, and how did his relationships change, especially with Billy Martin after that incident?
It's a very good question. For those unfamiliar with it, a bunch of Yankees went out to celebrate Billy Martin's birthday at the famous Copacabana nightclub. And there was some adult beverages involved, but it was also a bowling team sitting at a nearby table that was heckling Sammy Davis Jr., who was the performer. And one thing led to another, with the Yankees sort of saying, shut up, let him perform. And out of this all came one of the bowlers sort of knocked unconscious by Hank Bauer in the men's room.
Now, Hank Bauer was a Marine, or an ex-Marine.
Yeah, he was an old Marine with a face that looked like it had been punched out a few times itself. Well, anyway, the end result of this was Billy Martin was sort of seen as the last straw. There'd been too many brawls, too many bad things in Billy's past. And within a few days, he was traded to Kansas City, and it broke his heart. First of all, he was never going to be the same player again. That Yankee uniform elevated his game. And he was brokenhearted that Casey, who'd always been his guy, managed him at Oakland in the minor leagues, didn't stick up for him and rebut the trade and just say, no, I can't. Don't get rid of Billy Martin. So Billy went to Kansas City, and he never spoke to Casey again for many years. And people would occasionally say to Casey, how could that have happened? Billy's he's still crying over this trade. How could you not have even said anything to him? And Casey said, tell Billy Martin to grow up. This is the profession he chose. Guys get traded all the time. Knock it off, grow up, and play for your team. So that was a tough side of Casey Stengel that most people really didn't know about. But Casey was a pretty hard-headed, firm-thinking guy. And that's how he reacted to Billy Martin's boycott of Casey Stengel.
Wow. That's very, it's quite a night for the Yankees that'll always be remembered. And
by the way, one other thing, Ralph.
Yeah.
Just like 2 years ago, a guy came forward in a self-published book saying he was a bouncer at the Copa that night, or he was an employee of the Copa. And he was not working that night, but he went to see Sammy Davis. And he was the guy that punched out the bowler, not Hank Bauer. He said, I'm confessing this now because all these years the story's been wrong. And the reason I didn't take credit for it at the time was because it was a strict rule that if we weren't working, we weren't allowed in the club. And he broke that rule, and he would have gotten fired if he had made that confession.
Wow.
So that was pretty interesting, and I pointed it out to a friend who writes for the New York Times, and the Times made a story about it. So At the time the story ran 2 years ago, nobody cared anymore, let alone remembered the names of the principals in the fight, but it really was an interesting historic footnote.
Yeah, it is. I didn't know that until just now, but that's something. A couple of the things about Casey that uh, I don't know if they're true or not. Um, um, one of the things I've always heard is that Casey protected Whitey by never pitching him in Fenway. Now I know he pitched some in Fenway, but what any truth to that?
Yeah, he wasn't so much protecting Whitey as just playing the percentages because he was very smart and he knew lefties didn't do as well in Fenway Park as righties. So he would arrange the pitching rotation so that Whitey would frequently skip Fenway Park. And that wasn't a protection of Whitey, that was for the benefit of the Yankees as a team. Better chance of winning.
Yeah. And what was he also had a special relationship with Mickey, and going back to 51 with the disaster in the outfield. What are your thoughts on that, and how did Mantle's injury impact Casey? We know how it impacted the Mets,
Well,
but how did it impact Casey?
him and the team and baseball history. This was an injury in the outfield during the 51 World Series where Mickey's foot collided with a drain in right field and he collapsed to the ground, needed knee surgery, and was never again the same. That was the most serious injury that he ever had. And it came at age 19 in his rookie season. And so it impacted Casey and baseball history, but we never saw how good Mickey Mantle could be. And Casey himself always regretted that he never had the full Mickey Mantle that he saw in spring training in 51. That it was just one year in the late 50s, Casey was asked to name his all-time team, and he left Mantle off. He had DiMaggio there, who he didn't even like very much, and Bauer and Tommy Henrik, and he left Mantle off, who'd been his regular center fielder for most of his managing career. And I guess on that particular day, Casey was feeling like he got cheated out of what might have been a better player than Babe Ruth.
Wow.
So, yeah, there was complexities to the Mantle-Stengel relationship.
Yeah, it seems to be more there than any of us ever know. After the 1960 World Series, he was retired by the Yankees. Just in the 70s. And that was a tough series, and the last game had a lot of drama in it, notwithstanding the Mazeroski home run. But I think an inning earlier, Barrow was in left, and Jim Coates was on the mound, and Howard was catching. And Yogi was trying to, and the Pirates had runners on, either the bags loaded or first and third or something like that. I can't remember the full detail. And Yogi was trying to get Ellie's attention to remind Coates which base to throw the ball to if he got it. And timeout was never called. And of course, the next pitch, the ball goes back to Coates and he throws it to the wrong base. And so bad play by Coates kept the inning alive. The Pirates scored runs that they maybe wouldn't have scored, and that's what led to the ultimate defeat. And Casey's the fall guy in the end of that. How much was he affected by the outcome of the 60 World Series that fans don't know about?
He was blamed for the loss because he didn't start Whitey Ford in Game 1, which would have made Ford eligible for Game 7. The Coates play, which you're referring to, it wasn't a ball that Coates fielded. It was a ground ball to his left that he didn't cover first base.
Right.
All the players on the Yankees blamed Coates. But you may recall about 10 years ago, it was uncovered film from that whole game. And for the first time, guys saw that play and said, you know what, we were wrong about Jim Coates all the time.
Oh.
The ball was closer to the mound than suspected. And whereas the pitcher's supposed to run to first to receive the throw, this was sort of in no man's land where Coates' instinct was to break off the mound to try and field the ball, which it got past him, and runner was safe and the Pirates rallied. But it was wrong to blame Coates, but Yankee management was convinced that it was time for a younger manager. They didn't want to lose Ralph Houck, who was being courted by the Boston Red Sox. And Houck they saw as a great manager, which he was. So all that in play, they let Casey go, and they did it unceremoniously. I mean, they had a press conference to announce he was retiring, and he said, "I got fired." He told everybody in the room. And then there was a big ceremony out of presenting him with this bonus check, $166,000 for his service, like a gift. But that was his Yankee profit sharing check, which he was entitled to, paying to it all those years. I was in the same profit sharing plan without ever having any profits. I didn't get a check, but Casey made it seem like a special reward for his 12 years of service, which it wasn't at all.
Wow.
So there was a lot of camouflage going on with his dismissal.
Hey, let's have one more good story about Casey. Maybe this time in his Mets years, and to start wrapping things up.
Well, the Mets years were fun because the Mets were lovable losers, and Casey drew the attention away from the losses and onto himself. And if anything, he really enhanced his position as a great character. He was also a great salesman for the Mets. The press was drawn to him. The fans still even Yankee fans feeling sorry for him, drifted over to the Mets. And Casey was a great salesman. I mean, within a couple of years, the Mets were outdrawing the Yankees, despite the Yankees continuing to win. So, if anything, he remained a thorn in their side for years after the Yankees let him go. And if you go on YouTube and you just look up Casey Stengel, there's not a lot there, but you'll see him in his Mets uniform imploring fans to root for the Metsies, Metsies, Metsies. And he was just so much fun. It enhanced his reputation as just a great ambassador of the game. And for all his remaining years, he was always a Met at heart and not a Yankee.
Wow. That's understandable, I guess, given the circumstance he was in.
Yeah.
But Marty, thanks. What's next for you? I mean, are you going to write any more, or just remain a Yankee historian?
I didn't think I had another one in me, but my agent and publisher suggested that I put into a book all the stories I like to tell, which there are a couple hundred, turned into a full-size book. It'll be out next spring. Working title right now is Pinstripe Tales, Tales. And it was, needless to say, it was great fun to compile. Most of the stories are Yankee related, and I think most of them would at least put a smile on the reader's face, if not an outright laugh.
Yeah. The Yankees have had tons of characters in their career, in their history. It's, starting with the Colonels and going through even to today. They've got, years ago we had Swisher, who was quite the character, and I imagine there's some characters. This kid Cabrera looks like he could be a character. He's always got a big smile on his face. He's got that mischievous look. What?
Well, I never heard of him when they brought him up. What a find! He's a joy to watch.
And oh yeah, he's part of this trio that have been down there in Double and Triple A for the last couple of years. Peraza Cabrera, and Volpe.
Yeah.
And they've got this kid down there, Jason Dominguez, who looks like he's the real deal.
You know your stuff.
Not as well as you do, but I do follow the Yankees closely. I mean, it's in your blood. I mean, if you're a Yankee fan, it's in your blood.
Yeah.
And tell me if I'm wrong. I describe people always ask me sometimes, "What's the Yankee tradition?" Why? And I said, it started with Rupert when he bought that club. He recognized the product was winning. That was the product, and they started compiling championships in mid-20s on, and held on to it for a long time. And that is the culture of the Yankees. It's
And
not about
to do things first class. And I say sometimes for Colonel Rupert, he was the first owner to say, I want my guys wearing clean uniforms for second games of doubleheaders. So he would make sure they traveled with 2 pairs of uniforms to accommodate second games. And you could see the philosophy taking shape there. We're going to do better than other teams, classier.
He wanted them to look professional.
Yeah.
But that's them. It's been a great evening. Thanks for coming on. And maybe next year we'll see Judge hitting 74.
Or maybe not.
Or maybe not. Marty, great pleasure. Thanks for coming on. And when the book's out, we'll have you back on and we'll talk about the Pinstripe Tales. That's a great title. But Pinstripe Tales. Thanks.
All right. Casey Stengel, a character indeed. That was a great episode.
I tell you, Grace, I could talk baseball, especially Yankee baseball, all day.
I know. I'm sure anyone who knows you knows that as well. I'm excited for that story of short stories, the collection of short stories to come together. That might be interesting, even for someone who's not exactly a baseball fan like myself.
It would be great to get Marty to come back and talk about those. Short stories are fun and they're entertaining and they go quick. And if you don't like a particular short story, you can always skip it. But it's great to get into that. And
yep, absolutely.
So in about a month from now, Kelly Griffin's coming on. She wrote about I guess a memoir sort of about life on a nonprofit board, and they can be challenging. And it's a problem to serve or not serve, and you deal with a whole different host of issues when you're at the top of a nonprofit. And some things that come up are quite funny, and some are just leave you scratching your head. So Kelly should be great.
I couldn't even imagine. I mean, as you work with us, we're a small business. We work with several nonprofits, and everyone who I've met who worked with them is just fabulous. But I can imagine there are some stories that come out of being at the top. So we have a little bit of a break until that episode, and then the holidays are coming fast. So until we get there, guys, be the good news in someone's life.
Great.